Welcome to my YouTube channel. I've recently started my journey into photography and I'd like to take you along on that journey. In this first video, I want to talk about why it sometimes pays to revisit the same location. Recently, I spent a few days in the city of Valencia, home to a district called the City of Arts and Sciences. Now, this site features an opera house, an aquarium, a science museum and a botanical garden, mostly designed by star architect Santiago Calatrava. It's an incredibly photogenic and iconic place. You've probably already seen pictures of it, like the ones I'm showing you right now. These pictures were all taken by professional photographers who captured the magnificence of the architecture far better than I ever could. But what I can try to do is focus on the smaller, everyday moments that happen in this space. In street photography, there's a common concept called working the scene. This means that instead of quickly moving on to the next location, you explore all the possibilities a single place has to offer. You try different perspectives, move around within the space, and experiment with different camera settings. The idea is to stay in one place and refine your compositions, looking for better ways to capture the scene. What's talked about less often though is the value of returning to the same location at different times. Of course, you can't always do this, but when you can, you'll notice how a place changes, not just in terms of light, but in how people use it. A single location can serve multiple purposes throughout the day, attracting different groups of people. Office workers, delivery drivers, tourists, and locals all interact with the space in their own way, creating different photographic opportunities. Let's take a look at the photos I took while visiting and revisiting the City of Arts and Sciences over 3 consecutive days. My camera of choice was the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark III, mostly because it's the only decent camera I own. It's a micro four thirds camera, which means its uncropped images have a 4:3 aspect ratio. I use the Olympus 12-100 zoom lens, giving me a full frame equivalent focal range of 24-200. It's an incredibly versatile setup, perfect for travel or for someone who's a little shy about photographing people. On my first day, my main goal was to get a feel for the space and to look for the best vantage points. Luckily, there's a walkway overlooking the site that serves as a perfect shooting gallery, allowing me to photograph different elements from above. One thing that stood out immediately was how the architecture creates frames and layers perfect for isolating subjects within the composition. Take this shot for example. Unfortunately, my zoom lens didn't quite reach far enough, so the woman appears too small within the frame. But if you look closely, you'll see she's recording a video using a gimbal mounted camera. And this became a recurring theme, because the City of Arts and Sciences is so photogenic, it attracts a lot of photographers, videographers, influencers and selfie takers. So I ended up capturing many photos of people taking photos, like this couple and this young woman posing for her friend. I love photographing people while they're taking pictures because they're so absorbed in their own world that they're completely unaware of their surroundings, or of me. Put bluntly, it's an easy subject to capture. And the same goes for people engrossed in their smartphones. Here's a couple that caught my eye. I like the symmetry in their posture, but I wish I had framed more of the surrounding environment into the composition. Unfortunately, I had to react quickly before they walked out of the frame. I'm also drawn to typography. I often find letter forms visually interesting enough to stand on their own in a composition. I know not everyone shares that fascination, but I'm happy capturing this kind of photo, even if it might seem underwhelming to others. The next photo is my admittedly clumsy attempt at wildlife photography. I've never been particularly drawn to nature photography, especially birds in flight, so I wasn't expecting much. And to be honest, the result is pretty ordinary. It's the kind of cliché shot you've probably seen 100 times. Birds flying over water. What makes this image a little more interesting to me though is how immediately recognizable it is as an urban version of that classic scene. The bright cyan water and the dark blue stripe running along the top of the frame make it clear this isn't a natural body of water like a lake or a sea. It's an artificial pool, part of the site's deliberate landscaping. And the birds aren't majestic wildlife either. They're pigeons, the most city-dwelling birds you can find. By now, evening was setting in, and just as I was about to leave the site, I spotted a young boy using the architecture in the most natural way to him as something to climb on. I managed to snap this shot just as he jumped off the wall. And that was it for the first day. Not exactly an impressive haul, but I did manage to get a feel for the site and its surroundings. I was glad I returned the next day because something new was happening. Maintenance workers were cleaning the shallow water features, and this is a perfect example of why revisiting locations is valuable. On day 1 they weren't there, so I couldn't have captured these images. I cropped this photo to a 3:2 ratio because I felt it suited the composition better. After that, I wandered over to the botanical garden where a staircase leads visitors onto the site. For the next image, I converted it to black and white to create a strong graphic effect, almost like a duotone etching. The silhouette of a person disappearing up the stairs felt more striking without color. I also cropped the photo to remove some distracting elements. When photographing architecture, your first instinct is usually to keep everything perfectly level, to respect the horizontal lines. But at some point I accidentally took a tilted shot, and surprisingly I think it works. It might be because the subject is also looking diagonally downward. Later on, at the Science Museum on the site, they were unloading all kinds of mannequins as part of a new exhibit setup. At the delivery docks, I took this photo of one of the mannequins inside an open truck. Later that evening, I happened to walk past the site again on my way to a restaurant. I was curious to see how it looked at night, but honestly the results were underwhelming. The artificial lighting didn't do much for the architecture. However, I did stumble upon a group of women practicing kangoo dancing, a fitness activity that involves bouncing on spring-loaded shoes. They had brought their own speaker and were practicing in an open space beneath the opera house. I love moments like this when grand ceremonial spaces are reclaimed by locals in unexpected ways. Unfortunately, they had chosen a spot just outside the artificial lighting, making it difficult to photograph them. I had to crank up the ISO, and even then I could only capture them as silhouettes. I've noticed I tend to switch to black and white more quickly when shooting at night, mostly because I dislike the yellowish cast of artificial lighting. Sure, you can tweak the white balance to fix the tones, but I rarely find the results very satisfying. In daylight I prefer shooting in color, and then I'm drawn to bold and vibrant hues. But at night, when those colors aren't available, I often retreat to black and white, not so much as a creative choice, but more out of a kind of defeatism. It's something I'm still figuring out and hope to improve on. On the third and final day, I returned to one of the bridges that crosses over the site. I wanted to play with the idea that we're used to bridges spanning rivers or canals, but not as is the case here, what's essentially a very shallow pool. Just like with the birds on the first day, I expected this would create some visual tension between what we expect and what we actually see, though I am not sure if that came across. I'll let you decide. I cropped this photo to a 3:2 ratio afterward. It's got me wondering whether I need to rethink my approach when shooting with a micro four thirds camera. Maybe I need to pay closer attention to my framing, or perhaps I simply prefer the 3:2 look and should adjust my camera settings to match. It's something I'll need to figure out. Later I noticed how the architecture shadows created a beautifully shaped patch of light, perfect for highlighting subjects. That led to this shot. And with a different composition, this one. I stuck around for a while hoping to catch the right moment, but most of the people walking by kept moving away from me. I waited a bit longer, but it wasn't until I returned to the spot an hour later that I finally caught a couple walking toward me. Unfortunately, the photo didn't quite turn out the way I'd hoped. This kind of shot comes together when you combine a striking detail from avant-garde architecture like Calatrava's Opera House with a distant, ordinary apartment building in the background. The architecture provides beautiful frames and backdrops, but on the third day the place felt quiet and empty, except perhaps this maintenance worker, a rare bit of life amid the geometric forms. By this time the sky started to cloud over, with patches of sunlight breaking through now and then, creating a soft, moody light. I took this last shot toward the end of the day. Something about it felt right. The slender dog seemed to pair perfectly with the tall, thin cypress tree. If any dog and tree belonged together, it was these two. A greyhound perhaps might have been an even better match, but you can't have everything. I also liked how the owner stayed hidden behind a tree. My favorite photo from the third day though I saved for last. I'd been watching this entrance for a while and people passed through now and then, but I waited until this older man came along. It was a surprisingly warm day, but this elderly gentleman was bundled up as if it were the dead of winter, dressed head to toe in black, becoming a silhouette. I took a few shots of him, but this one stood out. His posture feels awkward and his frame a bit frail. There's something quietly vulnerable about the moment. And that brings us to the end of this video. As I mentioned earlier, it's often worth revisiting the same place at different times. In public spaces with lots of foot traffic, you'll notice the environment transforms depending on who's there. People define a space, they fill it, they shape it, and they use it in both expected and unexpected ways, like this little boy. He was there on Monday, but probably not on Tuesday, and these girls were dancing there on Tuesday evening, but they weren't around earlier in the afternoon. So it's often the people who give a place its meaning and character. Sometimes returning a few times to the same place lets you catch different moments with different people. Now, I know this isn't some groundbreaking insight. Still, it's easy to fall into the mindset of been there, done that, and took the picture. But returning to a familiar spot has its advantages. You also start to understand the place better. By the third day, I had a clearer sense of where the best opportunities were. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel, and in my next one I'll share more photos I took around Valencia, beyond the city of arts and sciences.